Claire Whitfield had exactly 3 rules for the morning of her interview. 1. Arrive 15 minutes early. 2. Do not spill anything on the white blouse. 3. Do not, under any circumstances, take the elevator on the left side of the Voss Group lobby, because the left elevator was the express and went directly to floors 30 through 40, and she needed floor 11. She broke all 3 rules before 9:15. The spill happened in the cab. A pothole, a coffee, a white blouse's worst nightmare. She'd blotted it as best she could with a napkin from her bag. The stain was faint. It was probably fine. She told herself this 4 times. She arrived at 9:17 because the cab had hit construction on 5th. And she took the wrong elevator because the lobby of the Voss Group building was, frankly, the most intimidating lobby she had ever stood in. All black marble and cathedral ceilings and the particular silence that very expensive architecture imposes on people who don't belong in it, and when the doors opened in front of her, she walked in without looking at the panel. She pressed 11. The elevator moved upward. Then past 11. Past 15. Past 20. She pressed 11 again, harder, as though the button's problem was insufficient conviction. The elevator did not stop until 34. The doors opened. Claire stepped out with the intention of finding another elevator, pressing the right button and arriving only slightly more late than she already was. This plan lasted approximately 4 seconds, which was the amount of time it took for a woman in a headset to appear from nowhere, look at Claire, look at a clipboard, look at Claire again, and say, "You're late. We started at 9. Go through the double doors, second room on the left." I think there's been a second room on the left. The woman was already turning away. They're waiting. There are moments in life where the machinery of events moves faster than the machinery of objection, and this was one of them. Claire opened her mouth to explain. The woman with the headset had vanished around a corner. The elevator doors had closed. And from somewhere down the corridor came the sound of her name, or a name very close to it, close enough that her feet moved toward it before her brain had issued the instruction. She went through the double doors. She found the second room on the left. She walked in. The room was not an interview room for interns. She understood this approximately half a second after entering it, which was half a second too late to do anything useful. It was a conference room, but not a working conference room, not the kind with laptops and coffee rings on the table and a whiteboard covered in diagrams. This one had been arranged with the deliberate formality of something ceremonial. A long oval table. 8 chairs on one side, occupied by 8 women who were all, very clearly, dressed for something considerably more important than an internship interview. On the other side, 3 people with tablets and the measured expressions of people conducting an evaluation. And at the head of the table, standing with his back to the door, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Manhattan skyline, a man. Tall. Dark suit, no tie, the kind of no tie that was a choice, not an oversight. Dark hair. The posture of someone accustomed to rooms stopping when he entered them. He turned when the door opened. Claire had approximately 1 second to take in his face, sharp, composed, somewhere in the early 30s, with eyes so dark they read almost black at this distance, before one of the people with tablets said, the final candidate. Please take the open seat." "I'm not," Claire began. "You are Ms. Whitfield," the tablet woman said. "Yes, but—" Claire Whitfield, referred by the Alderton agency? Claire stared. The Alderton agency was, in fact, the agency that had arranged her internship interview. On floor 11. For the marketing department. Of the Voss Group. "Yes," she said, slowly. "But I think—" "Please sit down, Ms. Whitfield. We're already behind schedule." The man at the head of the table had not looked away from her since she entered. His expression was unreadable. Not unfriendly, not particularly warm, just entirely and unnervingly attentive, the way certain people look at things that have caught their interest without their permission. Claire sat down. She told herself she would explain after. She would explain clearly and everyone would laugh, and she would go to floor 11 and it would be fine. She looked at the woman beside her, who had the serene, prepared expression of someone who had been briefed. What exactly, Claire said quietly, is this for? The woman looked at her with mild surprise. The selection, she said. For Mr. Voss. Selection for what position? The woman's mild surprise deepened into something closer to disbelief. His wife, she said. Claire looked at the woman. She looked at the three people with tablets. She looked at the man at the head of the table, who was still watching her, and who she now understood was not a department head, not a senior manager, not any of the things she had assumed. He was Daniel Voss, CEO of the Voss Group, 33 years old, worth approximately $12 billion, and the subject of more business magazine covers in the last 3 years than she could count. And he was watching her with an expression that was, she would think later, the most dangerous expression she had ever seen on a human face, because it was the expression of someone who had already decided something. The selection, she learned in the next 20 minutes by a combination of whispered questions to the woman beside her, whose name was Priya, who was very gracious about the questions despite being in direct competition with her, had been organized by the Voss Group's board of directors. Daniel Voss had, at 33, become a problem for his board. Not a business problem. His business judgment was, by all accounts, extraordinary. He had taken the company from a regional real estate holding to a global investment group in 8 years. The stock price problem was non-existent. The operational problem was non-existent. The problem was the tabloids. 3 years of tabloid coverage, a parade of relationships that lasted between 3 weeks and 4 months, photographed at every glamorous location in the known world, generating the kind of press that made institutional investors nervous. Not because of the relationships themselves, but because of the instability they suggested. Because instability at the top of a $12 billion group made certain people move their money to more settled-looking vehicles. The board had presented Daniel Voss with data. He had looked at the data with the expression of a man who understood the data and found it deeply irritating. A negotiation had followed, the details of which Claire was only getting in fragments from Priya. The conclusion. Daniel Voss would participate in a structured selection process, organized with professional discretion, to identify a suitable long-term partner. 8 candidates, pre-screened by criteria that Priya listed quietly and that Claire stopped listening to after must have demonstrable social fluency and career ambition, because she was busy thinking about the fact that she was sitting in this room under what appeared to be false pretenses, and that she needed to say something. She needed to say something now. She raised her hand. The tablet woman looked at her. I need to clarify something, Claire said. I believe I'm in the wrong room. A pause. Your name is Claire Whitfield, the tablet woman said. Yes. Referred by the Alderton agency for consideration in the Voss selection process? I was referred by the Alderton agency, Claire said carefully, for an internship interview. In the marketing department. On floor 11. The 3 tablet people looked at each other. Priya, beside her, covered her mouth with her hand. One of the other candidates made a sound that might, in a different room, have been a laugh. And Daniel Voss, who had been leaning against the window frame with his arms crossed and the expression of a man attending an event he had agreed to against his better judgment, looked at Claire with something that shifted in his face, something that was, unmistakably, genuine. You came for an internship, he said. His voice was low and even, with the particular quality of someone who chose words with care. Floor 11, Claire confirmed. Marketing. And you took the express elevator. I pressed 11. It didn't listen. He looked at her for a moment. Why didn't you leave when you walked in, he said. Your assistant told me to sit down very quickly. She's not my assistant. She has a clipboard. I find clipboards authoritative. A pause. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, not quite. But the ghost of one, controlled by someone who had practiced controlling it. He looked at the tablet woman. Claire Whitfield isn't on the candidate list? The tablet woman had her tablet very close to her face. There is AC, Whitfield on the alternate list, she said, with the careful pronunciation of someone who knew she was going to need to explain something to someone later. The file was incomplete. We assumed. Right. Daniel Voss looked back at Claire. So, you're an intern applicant. Marketing. Floor 11, she confirmed. And you'd like to go there? Yes. He was quiet for a moment. The $12 billion and the 33 years and the board of directors and the tabloid problem were all invisible, in this moment, behind the expression of a man doing a specific kind of thinking. After, he said. Claire blinked. After what? After the session. 40 minutes. Then you can go to floor 11. He looked at the tablet people. She stays. Mr. Voss, the tablet woman began, the protocol. Note the deviation from protocol, he said, in the tone of someone who had noted many deviations from protocol in his life, and found them generally more interesting than the protocol itself. She stays. He unfolded his arms, moved to the head of the table, and sat down. Claire looked at Priya. Priya looked back at Claire with the expression of a woman who had prepared extensively for this selection process and had not anticipated that her primary competition would be someone who was here by accident. Welcome to the Voss selection, Priya said diplomatically. Thank you, said Claire. I'm not participating. Of course, said Priya. They both looked at Daniel Voss. He was looking at the first candidate's file. But he had, in the 3 seconds before opening it, looked at Claire. The session was structured. Each candidate presented herself, background, career, ambitions, values, the shape of the life she was living and hoped to live. The tablet people asked questions. Daniel Voss asked questions. Some of the questions were the expected kind. How do you handle public attention? What are your views on the obligations that come with a public role? And some were not, what's the last book you read, because you wanted to, not because you felt you should? And, what's the thing you're best at that nobody knows about? Claire sat at the end of the table and did not present herself. She watched. She was good at watching. It was, in fact, the skill she was most hoping to demonstrate to the marketing department on floor 11, the ability to pay close attention to a room, to the way people moved in it, to the distance between what people said and what they meant. She watched Daniel Voss more than she watched the candidates. He was very controlled. He asked questions with the precision of someone who did not waste them, each one designed to open a specific door, to see what was behind it. He listened to the answers with complete attention, which was rarer than it sounded in people of his particular altitude. Most people who operated at that level had a way of listening that was actually just waiting for the part where they could respond, where they could lead, where the conversation became useful to them. Daniel Voss actually listened. He wrote things down on a notepad, in handwriting she couldn't read from her distance. Once, about 20 minutes in, he looked up from a candidate's answer about philanthropy and looked directly at Claire, as though checking to see if she was still there. She was. He looked back at the candidate. When the formal presentations were done, the tablet people consulted their devices and announced a brief break. The candidates stepped out in small, carefully social clusters. Claire stood up and looked for the door. Ms. Whitfield. She stopped. He was still at his end of the table, the notepad in front of him, looking at her with the direct attention that she was starting to understand was simply his default setting. Not a performance of intensity, just the way he looked at things he found worth looking at. You watched the whole session, he said. I was waiting for it to be over so I could go to floor 11. You were evaluating, he said. Not waiting. She considered denying this. Habit, she said instead. What did you observe? She looked at him. You're asking me to critique your selection process? I'm asking what you saw. She looked at the empty chairs where the candidates had been sitting. You already know who you're not interested in, she said. You knew before the presentations were half done. The questions you asked in the second half were shorter, you'd stopped exploring and started confirming conclusions. He was very still. And the ones you're still considering, he said. Priya, she said. Because she answered the book question with something she'd actually thought about, not something she'd prepared. And possibly the woman in the blue, she deflected your follow-up question, which most people would have answered without noticing it was a test. He looked at her for a long moment. What's your deflection, he said. I'm not a candidate, she said. That's not a deflection. That's a position. Then it's my position. He picked up his pen, tapped it once on the notepad. Why marketing? The subject change was abrupt. She let it land. Because I'm good at understanding why people want things, she said. Not what they say they want. What they actually want underneath. The gap between those two things is where marketing lives. And in this room? He nodded at the table. What do the people in this process actually want? Underneath? She should have said, I don't know, or that's not my place to speculate. She said neither. The board wants optics, she said. A stable long-term picture. They want your tabloid era to stop producing headlines that move the institutional money. She paused. The candidates want different things. Priya wants a genuine partnership. She's built a real career, and she's not here to abandon it. She's here because she thinks a real partnership with the right person could be the next chapter. Some of the others want the life that comes with the name. There's nothing wrong with either. And what does Daniel Voss want, he said. The third person was deliberate. She noted it. I've known you for 40 minutes, she said. What do you have? She looked at him. $12 billion. The board pressure. The tabloids. The controlled face and the uncontrolled moment at the corner of his mouth when she'd said, I find clipboards authoritative. You want someone who doesn't perform for you, she said quietly. You can tell when people perform. You've been able to tell your whole career. And you're in a room full of people performing their best version of a suitable partner, and you're very tired of it. And the reason you told me to stay is because I walked in here by accident and I've been the only person in this room who hasn't been performing anything at all. The room was very quiet. He looked at her with an expression that was, she would think later, the most unguarded she would ever see on his face. Except for one other moment, much later, that she could not have anticipated from here. Floor 11, he said. She blinked. You should go, he said. Your interview. She picked up her bag. Right. Ms. Whitfield. She stopped at the door. The coffee stain, he said. On the blouse. Left side. She looked down. I know. It's barely visible, he said. But I noticed it when you walked in. I noticed things too. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went to find an elevator that would take her to floor 11. She pressed the button carefully this time. She got the internship. Of course she got the internship. She was good at what she did. She had prepared, and the marketing department interview on floor 11 was, after the preceding hour on floor 34, almost relaxing in its normalcy. A conference room with coffee rings on the table. A manager named Sandra who asked reasonable questions and laughed at appropriate moments. A conversation about brand analysis and consumer behavior that Claire navigated with the comfortable fluency of someone who had thought about these things for a long time. She started the following Monday. She told no one about floor 34. What would she say? I accidentally auditioned to be the CEO's wife, and he told me I could observe but not participate, and then pointed out my coffee stain? She filed it under strange things that happen in lobbies and tried to leave it there. It didn't entirely stay. The problem was that the Voss Group building had one cafeteria, ground floor, open to all employees regardless of floor, and Daniel Voss, it turned out, came to the cafeteria. Not often. Not predictably. But sometimes, at 7:45 in the morning before the building filled up, he was there with a coffee and a newspaper, and the focused solitude of someone who had found the one place in the building where people were slightly too intimidated to interrupt him. Claire was there at 7:45 because the subway was faster at that hour, and arriving early gave her time to organize her thoughts before Sandra's 9 o'clock team meeting. The first time they occupied the cafeteria at the same time, he looked up from the newspaper, registered her, and looked back down. She got her coffee and sat at the opposite end of the room. The second time, he looked up and held her gaze for a moment before returning to the newspaper. The third time, he said, without looking up, how's floor 11? She was 3 tables away. Good, she said. The work. Brand analysis for the Q3 European campaign. It's interesting. He turned a page of the newspaper. What's interesting about it? She considered not answering. She answered. The gap between how the Voss Group presents in European markets and how it's actually perceived. There's a 12-point divergence in the brand trust metric that nobody on the team seems to think is urgent. He looked up from the newspaper. 12 points, he said. Between stated brand values and consumer perception in the German and French markets specifically. I've been looking at the data for a week. It's consistent. He looked at her with the same directness she remembered from floor 34. Have you written it up? It's not my project to write up. I'm an intern. Write it up, he said. Send it to Sandra. Tell her to forward it to me. She looked at him. You're the CEO. I'm aware. I've been here 6 days. The number of days you've been here doesn't change the validity of a 12-point brand trust divergence. He looked back at his newspaper. Write it up. She wrote it up. Sandra forwarded it. 2 days later, Sandra called her into her office and said, with an expression of mild bewilderment, that the analysis had been flagged by the executive floor as priority follow-up, and that Claire was being temporarily assigned to a cross-functional brand task force that reported to the European strategy team. Congratulations, Sandra said. I think. Thank you, Claire said. I think. The task force met on floor 31. It was not floor 34. This was fine. Claire was not thinking about floor 34. She was also not thinking about the fact that Daniel Voss had read her analysis in 2 days flat, that he had flagged it personally, that the task force was chaired by his head of European strategy, a formidably competent woman named Dr. Lena Marsh, who had a PhD in organizational behavior, and who told Claire on the first day that her analysis was the clearest articulation of this problem I've seen from inside the company. The divergence has been visible in the data for 18 months, Dr. Marsh said, looking at Claire's charts. Why do you think no one raised it? Because it requires admitting the brand strategy isn't working, Claire said. Which requires admitting the strategy was wrong. Which is uncomfortable for the people who made the strategy. Dr. Marsh looked at her for a moment. How old are you? 24. You should have been here 2 years ago. I was finishing my degree 2 years ago. Dr. Marsh smiled, a quick, precise smile. Well, you're here now. She ran into Priya in the elevator in her 3rd week. She recognized her immediately, the serene, prepared posture, the quality of the clothing. Priya recognized her at the same moment, and her eyes widened slightly. The intern, Priya said. The candidate, Claire said. A beat of mutual recognition. You work here, Priya said. Floor 11. Marketing. Apparently temporarily floor 31. She paused. Did the selection continue? Priya smiled. It did. It's ongoing. She looked at Claire with a direct, appraising quality. He asked about you. Afterward. Claire looked at the elevator doors. What did he ask? Whether you'd gone to floor 11. A pause. And whether you'd gotten the internship. Another pause. And this is the interesting part, whether you'd written anything worth reading yet. Claire thought about a 12-point brand trust divergence. I may have written something, she said carefully. I know, Priya said. Dr. Marsh mentioned it to the strategy board. She looked at Claire with an expression that was, unexpectedly, warm rather than competitive. He chose well, walking in here by accident. He didn't choose anything. I was in the wrong room. Claire, Priya said, as the elevator reached her floor and the doors opened. I've met Daniel Voss twice now. He is not a man who does anything by accident. She stepped out. Think about that. The doors closed. Claire thought about that. He called her directly in her 5th week. Not through Sandra. Not through Dr. Marsh. His assistant, a different woman from the one with the clipboard, this one named Helen, who had the unflappable efficiency of someone who organized a CEO's life the way an air traffic controller organized flights, called Claire's desk and said that Mr. Voss would like 15 minutes at 4 o'clock. The 4 o'clock was in his office. Floor 34. Corner. The view of Manhattan that she'd seen through the windows during the selection. He was at his desk when she was shown in, the desk of a man who actually worked at it, covered in documents and a specific organized disorder that spoke of active thinking rather than performance. He closed the file he was reading, stood, and gestured to the chairs by the window. They sat across from each other with the city behind him. The task force report, he said. Dr. Marsh presented it last week. I read your section specifically. He looked at her with the same direct attention. The strategic recommendation, repositioning the German market presence around transparency metrics rather than aspiration metrics. Where did that come from? The data, she said. German consumers in your target bracket over-index on institutional trust. They don't respond to aspiration. They respond to accountability. Your current campaign leads with aspiration. It's the wrong signal for the market. The campaign cost $4 million and took 14 months to develop. I know. She held his gaze. It's still the wrong signal. He was quiet for a moment. The marketing team will push back, he said. They already have. Dr. Marsh handles it well. If they push back on Dr. Marsh, we escalate to me. He looked at her. I want you in that meeting. I'm an intern. You were an intern, he said. As of this conversation, you're a junior analyst on the European strategy team, reporting to Dr. Marsh. Compensation will be adjusted. Helen will handle the paperwork. Claire looked at him. That's a significant promotion for someone who's been here 5 weeks. The analysis is worth the promotion. The analysis has been worth it since week 1. He held her gaze. I don't measure contribution in weeks. She was quiet for a moment. The city was doing its thing behind him, moving, enormous, indifferent to this specific conversation. The selection, she said. Is it finished? Something shifted in his face, small, controlled. No, he said. Is it going well? That depends on the definition. The board's definition. The board has a definition, he said. I have a different one. She looked at him. He looked at her. Outside, a cloud moved across the sun and the light in the office changed and then changed back. You should know, she said carefully, that I wasn't in that room as a candidate. I've never been a candidate. Whatever you think you observed on floor 34. I observed someone who told me what I actually wanted, he said, without being asked to and without performing it. In a room full of people who had prepared speeches about what they thought I wanted. He paused. That's a rare thing. It wasn't insight, she said. It was just, I had nothing to lose. I was in the wrong room. I didn't have a position to protect. You had plenty to lose, he said quietly. You had the internship. You had floor 11. You could have said nothing and waited it out. He looked at her steadily. You said what you saw. I shouldn't have. Why? She opened her mouth and closed it again. Why shouldn't you have said what you saw, he said. She didn't have a clean answer. The clean answer would have been because it wasn't my place, and the honest answer was more complicated, and she wasn't sure she was ready to hand him the honest answer yet. I should go, she said instead. I have a 4:30 with Dr. Marsh. I know. I put it in your calendar. He stood when she stood, a reflex of courtesy that was, she was learning, simply part of how he occupied space. Claire. She stopped. The coffee stain, he said. First morning. You handled the whole situation, wrong elevator, wrong room, wrong everything, without losing the thread of yourself. He said it simply, as an observation rather than a compliment. I noticed that kind of thing. She looked at him. You notice a lot of things, she said. Yes, he said. So do you. She went to find Dr. Marsh. She took the elevator carefully. The board meeting happened in October, 6 weeks after her promotion to junior analyst. The marketing team did push back. They pushed back with the organized conviction of people who had spent 14 months and $4 million on a campaign and were not interested in being told by a 24-year-old who had been employed for 11 weeks that the signal was wrong. The meeting was on floor 32. Daniel Voss was at the head of the table. Claire sat beside Dr. Marsh, who had the composed readiness of a general who has walked into this battle before. The head of marketing, a man named Peter Carroll, 50s, impressive silver hair, the bearing of someone who had survived 15 years of corporate politics by being simultaneously charming and immovable, presented the counterargument with considerable skill. The campaign was performing within acceptable parameters. The brand trust divergence was within normal variance. The interns. He said junior analysts carefully, but the beat before it carried the weight of what he'd started to say. Analysis was based on a narrow data window. Claire had prepared for narrow data window. She had 3 months of additional data, pulled from 3 different market research databases, normalized, cross-referenced. She had a German consumer behavior study from an academic institution that confirmed the transparency over aspiration finding from the opposite direction. She had built a model. She walked Peter Carroll through the model. He pushed back at 3 points, all legitimate. She had answers to all 3, also legitimate. The room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when they've stopped waiting for someone to win and started watching how it's being done. At the end of it, Daniel Voss looked at Peter Carroll and said, "Adjust the German campaign." Peter Carroll looked at his silver hair's worth of dignity and said, "I'd like to run a 6-week pilot before." 6-week pilot in the Munich and Frankfurt markets, Daniel said. Ms. Whitfield's team leads the metrics. Report back to me in November. He looked at Claire. The look lasted less than 2 seconds and contained nothing that was visible to anyone else in the room. She looked back. "Thank you," she said, which was directed at the room. Priya found her afterward in the hallway outside 32. "I watched the board feed," Priya said. Claire had learned, a lot of things Priya knew about the Voss Group's internal workings that suggested she was doing her own research. "You were good." "Peter Carroll is very good at his job," Claire said honestly. "He had 3 valid objections. And you had 3 valid answers." Priya looked at her. "The selection process is concluding. The board wants a decision before the end of the quarter." "Why are you telling me this?" Priya was quiet for a moment. "Because I'm going to withdraw," she said. Claire looked at her. "I've thought about it carefully," Priya said, with the calm of someone who had thought about it very carefully and arrived at a clean conclusion. "What I want is a genuine partnership with someone who sees me clearly. And I've observed carefully that Daniel Voss's attention in these last weeks has had a direction." She met Claire's eyes. "It's not me." "Priya." "I'm not sad about it," Priya said. "Genuinely. I think I may have come to this process to clarify what I actually want, and I've clarified it." She smiled, a real one. "I'm going to start my own company. I've been thinking about it for 2 years." The clarification helped. She looked at Claire one more time. "You should stop pretending you don't know what's happening." "Nothing is happening," Claire said. "I work here. He's the CEO." "Claire," Priya said gently. "He restructured a company task force around your analysis. He promoted you in 5 weeks. He knew you had a 4:30 meeting with Dr. Marsh because he built your calendar." She paused. "Men like Daniel Voss don't build junior analysts' calendars." She walked away. Claire stood in the hallway on floor 32 and thought about the morning of her interview, the wrong elevator, the clipboard she'd found authoritative, the room she should never have entered. She thought about what Priya had said. He's not a man who does anything by accident. She took the stairs to floor 11. He found her at 7:45 on a Tuesday, in the cafeteria, as he had found her before. Except this time he brought his coffee to her table. She looked at the chair he pulled out. He sat down in it. He did not open the newspaper. "The pilot results came in early," he said. "I know. Dr. Marsh briefed me yesterday. 14% improvement in brand trust metrics in Munich. Frankfurt is 11. 11 is statistically significant for a 6-week period." "Yes." He looked at his coffee. Peter Carroll acknowledged the methodology this morning, without being asked. "He's good at his job," she said again. "He is." He looked up. "So are you." "Thank you." He was quiet for a moment. The cafeteria was quiet at this hour, a few early arrivals at distant tables, the sound of the espresso machine. "The selection process has concluded," he said. She was very still. "The board is satisfied," he said. "The conclusion, technically, produced a result." "Technically," she said carefully. "The result the board recognizes is not the result I'm interested in." He looked at her directly. The $12 billion directness, the same as it had always been, and underneath it something she was only now letting herself name. "I've spent 11 weeks watching you work. Watching you think. Watching you say what you see regardless of whether it costs you something." He paused. "In that room on floor 34, you told me what I wanted without performing it. Every day since then, you've been the most honest person in every room you've been in." "That's a professional observation," she said, because she needed to say something while she decided how to feel. "It's also a personal one," he said. "The professional part got you the junior analyst role. The personal part is why I'm sitting at your table at 7:45 on a Tuesday instead of reading a newspaper." She looked at him. "I came here for an internship," she said. "I know. I walked into the wrong room." You did. You told me to stay. I did. She stopped. That was a lot of power to use. You're the CEO. I was a candidate in a process I didn't even understand. I couldn't have said no. He held her gaze. You could have, he said. You said no to the selection. Clearly and repeatedly. You said no to being a candidate. You've been saying no with full coherence from the first minute. He paused. The fact that you could say no to those things is exactly why I'm asking now. From outside the process. On flat ground. She looked at him. Flat ground. She thought about the wrong elevator, the clipboard, the room that had changed everything without her permission. She thought about 11 weeks of a job she had turned out to love, in a building where every morning at 7:45 she had known, without quite admitting it, exactly who she was hoping to find at the other end of the cafeteria. She thought about the coffee stain on the white blouse, which he had noticed before she'd said a word. Flat ground, she said. Flat ground, he confirmed. The espresso machine made its sound. Someone dropped a tray at the far end of the cafeteria and apologized loudly. I'm a junior analyst, she said. You're the CEO. I'm aware of the org chart. It's complicated. Yes. He looked at her steadily. Most things worth doing are. She looked at him for a long moment. The man who had listened when everyone else performed. The man who had read her analysis in 2 days and flagged it and changed a task force structure and built a calendar and come to a cafeteria table with his coffee. The man who had told her the first day that he noticed things too. Coffee, she said finally. Outside the building. This weekend. Where you're not the CEO and I'm not the junior analyst. Something happened on his face. The controlled expression and the corner of the mouth and the particular quality of someone who has been holding something very still for a very long time and has just been given permission to set it down. Saturday, he said. Saturday, she said. She picked up her coffee. And for the record, she said, standing, the German campaign pilot is going to show 20% improvement by month 3. The data is already moving. He looked up at her. I know, he said. I saw the trajectory. So did I. She went to floor 11. He watched her go, and then he opened the newspaper, and there was nothing in it more interesting than what had just happened at the 7:45 table in the cafeteria of the Voss Group building on a Tuesday in October. Saturday was a farmer's market in Brooklyn, and then a walk along the waterfront, and then coffee at a place that was the opposite of the Voss Group building in every measurable way, small, worn, run by a man named Bart who had opinions about pour-over technique that he shared freely. Daniel Voss, it turned out, had opinions about pour-over technique too. He and Bart argued about grind consistency for 6 minutes, while Claire sat on a stool and watched with the expression of someone watching a documentary about a subject she hadn't known existed. You're a coffee person, she said, when Bart went to help another customer. I have strong opinions about things I do every day, he said. What other strong opinions do you have? He thought about it with the seriousness he brought to everything. Architecture. The way buildings relate to the streets around them. I studied it for 2 years before I went into real estate development, and it ruined me for bad buildings forever. A pause. Books. I read too slowly and annotate too much, and I've been told this makes me insufferable to lend things to. He looked at her. You. She thought about it. Data that's been misread. It genuinely bothers me, not in a professional way, in a visceral way. Like someone with perfect pitch hearing a wrong note. She paused. And bread. I bake bread. I have opinions. He looked at her with the expression of someone adding a fact to a file he'd been building for 11 weeks. What kind? Sourdough, mostly. Some rye. I find the fermentation process genuinely interesting, and I'm aware this is not a normal thing to say. The fermentation process, he repeated. The microbiology of it. The way wild yeast works. It's patient and unpredictable, and you have to pay close attention or it goes wrong. She paused. It's a lot like data analysis, actually. Except you can eat the data. He looked at her for a long moment. The room, he said. On floor 34. The first day. Yes. I had decided, before that session, that I was going to go through the process and produce whatever the board wanted, and it would be correct and appropriate and entirely hollow. He said the last word with the directness of someone who had had 11 weeks to find the right one. And then the door opened and you walked in, and you had coffee on your blouse, and you sat down because a woman with a clipboard told you to, and you spent 40 minutes paying attention to everything in the room, and then you told me what I actually wanted, and I realized I had never, in a room organized specifically to find me something, been found. The worn coffee shop on a Saturday in Brooklyn was very quiet. I walked into the wrong room, she said softly. I know. He held her gaze. It was the right room. Bart came back and topped up their coffees without being asked, with the wisdom of a man who had seen many things over a counter and knew when to be quiet and when to be useful. Saturday, Claire said. Saturday, he said. Outside, Brooklyn was being itself. Loud, layered, gloriously indifferent to $12 billion decisions and intern applications and wrong elevators and the terrifying, specific, impossible-to-plan thing that happened in rooms you walked into by accident. The German campaign hit 22% improvement at month 3. Claire sent the data to Dr. Marsh at 7:30 in the morning from the cafeteria table, because old habits were hard to break and the coffee at floor 34 was, honestly, not as good as Agnes's. She had introduced Daniel to Agnes's in November, and he had argued about the espresso technique with the owner for 8 minutes and been invited back, which was Agnes's highest honor. He sat across from her at the cafeteria table, reading the data she'd forwarded. 22, he said. I said 20, she said. I was conservative. You're never conservative. I was being modest. He looked up from the data and looked at her in the way that he had looked at her from the first morning, the full attention, nothing performed, nothing held back. Peter Carroll wants you to lead the full European brand strategy, he said. He presented it to the board yesterday. Peter Carroll wants me to lead it? He said, and I'm quoting, the junior analyst's instincts are better than 14 months of work by people who should know better. He paused. It's the highest compliment he's capable of. She stopped. That's a lot. It is. He looked at the data. Are you going to say yes? She thought about floor 11, the internship, the wrong elevator, the wrong room, the clipboard she'd found authoritative, the 40 minutes that had changed the shape of the year. She thought about sourdough bread and pour-over arguments and architects who noticed the way buildings related to the streets around them. She thought about flat ground. Yes, she said. I'm going to say yes. He looked at her across the cafeteria table at 7:30 in the morning with the whole building waking up around them. Good, he said. It was, in the end, a very simple word for something that had started in the most complicated possible way. But then, she was learning, the simplest things usually were.